He thought he could prove her faith to be weak, a fragile thread that would snap under the weight of his pointed questions. The liberal TV host had invited Karoline Leavitt, the press secretary of the United States, onto his show with a clear intention: to expose what he believed was a shallow belief in God, something he assumed couldn't withstand the pressures of her high-profile role. But as Karoline began to speak, her voice steady and her conviction unshakable, the host realized he had underestimated her and the power of her faith in a way that would leave him and the audience utterly stunned. The host had built his career on challenging his guests, often catching them off guard with questions designed to reveal their weaknesses. He saw Karoline as an easy target. She was young, relatively new to the national stage, and working for an administration that polarized the country. He assumed that her faith, if she had any at all, would be a superficial talking point, something she might mention to appeal to a certain audience but couldn't possibly live by in the cutthroat world of politics. He began the interview with a question that carried a subtle sting. He asked how someone in her position, with the relentless demands of being press secretary, could possibly have time for something as abstract as faith. His tone suggested that faith was a luxury, a relic of a simpler time that surely couldn't survive the chaos of her daily life. He expected her to stumble, to offer a vague response that he could easily dismantle. But Karoline didn't hesitate. She looked him directly in the eyes, her voice calm and clear, and began to share a story that traced back to her childhood, revealing the unshakable foundation of her belief in God. Karoline explained that her faith wasn't something she had picked up along the way or turned to in moments of convenience. It was a cornerstone, built into her from the earliest days she could remember. She grew up in a small town where faith was a way of life. Sundays meant church with her family, where she sat in the pews listening to sermons about God's love and His plans for His children. Her parents, especially her mother, taught her to pray, before meals, before bed, and whenever she felt scared or uncertain. She remembered her mother's words, spoken often and with quiet certainty. God had a plan for everyone, a purpose that would unfold if they trusted Him. As a child, Karoline took those words to heart. She recalled sitting in her room at night, whispering her prayers, asking God to guide her, to show her the path she was meant to walk. But Karoline admitted that her faith hadn't always been easy to hold on to. As she grew older, she faced moments of doubt that tested her beliefs. In her teenage years, she began to question the things she had been taught. The world seemed so big, so complicated, and the idea of a higher power guiding her every step felt harder to grasp. She saw friends drift away from their faith, caught up in the distractions of high school, parties, popularity, and the pressure to fit in. She wondered if she might follow the same path, if her childhood beliefs were just a phase she would outgrow. Yet, every time she felt herself slipping, something pulled her back. She recalled a moment when she was 16, sitting alone in her room after a particularly tough day at school. She had been struggling with feelings of inadequacy, wondering if she would ever amount to anything. In that moment, she prayed, not out of habit, but out of desperation. She asked God for a sign, for something to show her that she wasn't alone. The next day, a teacher approached her with an opportunity to join a leadership program, one that would spark her interest in politics and set her on the path she now walked. To Karoline, that wasn't a coincidence. It was God answering her prayer, showing her that He had a plan for her, even when she couldn't see it herself. The host listened, his confident demeanor faltering slightly, but he wasn't ready to let her off the hook. He pressed further, asking how she could maintain her faith in a job as demanding and often ruthless as hers. As press secretary, she faced constant scrutiny, criticism, and the pressure of representing an administration that divided the nation. Didn't that shake her belief in a God who was supposed to be good? Karoline smiled softly, her composure unshaken. She explained that her faith wasn't a shield from hardship. It was a source of strength to endure it. She believed that life was a constant battle between two forces, good and evil, She saw those forces at play every day, in the decisions she made, in the challenges she faced, and in the world around her. Evil, she said, was the doubt that crept in during tough moments, the fear that she wasn't enough, the temptation to compromise her values for the sake of approval. Good was the courage to keep going, the conviction to stand for what she believed in, and the hope that there was a greater purpose behind it all. Karoline went on to share how her faith had guided her through some of the most difficult moments of her career. She recalled the early days of working for Donald Trump, long before his return to the presidency. Back then, she was a young staffer, new to the political world, and the scrutiny was relentless. Critics called her inexperienced, questioned her loyalty, and doubted her ability to handle the pressure. There were nights when she lay awake, wondering if she had made the right choice, if she was strong enough to keep going. But each time she turned to prayer. She asked God to give her the wisdom to speak with clarity, the resilience to withstand the attacks, and the humility to serve a cause greater than herself. And each time she felt a sense of peace, a quiet assurance that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The host shifted uncomfortably, clearly not expecting the depth of her response. He tried a different approach, asking how she could believe in a God who allowed so much suffering in the world. If God had a plan, as she claimed, why did bad things happen to good people? Why did evil seem to triumph so often? Karoline nodded, acknowledging the weight of the question. She admitted that she didn't have all the answers. She wasn't a theologian, she said, but a woman who had lived her faith through experience. She believed that God's plan wasn't always about preventing pain. It was about using pain to shape us, to prepare us for the work He had in store. She pointed to her own life as an example. The doubts she faced as a teenager, the struggles she endured in her career, they weren't random. They were part of a journey that made her who she was, that prepared her for the role she now held. Then Karoline turned the conversation to a moment that had gripped the nation, the attack on Donald Trump. She spoke with a quiet intensity, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had witnessed history unfold. She reminded the host of that day, when Trump narrowly escaped an assassination attempt. The details were still fresh in everyone's minds, the chaos, the fear, the moment when the nation held its breath. Karoline had been there, working behind the scenes, watching as the man she served came within inches of losing his life. In the aftermath, she saw something that reaffirmed her faith more than ever. Trump survived, against all odds, and went on to win the presidency once again. To Karoline, that wasn't luck. It was divine intervention. She believed with every fiber of her being that God had saved Trump for a reason, that He had a special kind of work for him to do. The host raised an eyebrow, his skepticism clear. He asked if she truly believed that God played a role in politics, that He had a hand in something as messy and human as an election. Karoline didn't waver. She explained that she saw God's hand in everything, not just in the big moments, but in the small ones too. She believed that Trump's survival and his return to the presidency were part of a larger plan to make America great again. She spoke passionately about the values she saw in Trump's leadership, his commitment to the country, his willingness to fight for what he believed in, even in the face of relentless opposition. To her, those qualities reflected the kind of purpose that God often instilled in leaders. She saw Trump as a man chosen to serve, to lead America through a time of division and uncertainty, and she felt honored to be part of that mission. Karoline then brought the conversation back to her own role. As press secretary, she faced immense pressure every day. She stood at the podium, answering questions from journalists who often seemed more interested in trapping her than seeking the truth. She dealt with criticism from both sides of the political spectrum, with some accusing her of being too loyal to Trump, while others claimed she wasn't loyal enough. Through it all, her faith remained her anchor. She started each day with a prayer, asking God to give her the words to speak, the patience to listen, and the strength to stand firm. She believed that her position wasn't an accident. It was part of God's plan for her, just as Trump's presidency was part of His plan for the nation. The host, now visibly unsettled, tried one last question. He asked if her faith ever made her feel out of place in a world that often seemed to reject religion, especially in the political sphere. Karoline smiled, her expression serene. She admitted that there were times when she felt like an outsider. She saw the way some people rolled their eyes when she mentioned her faith, the way they dismissed her beliefs as outdated or irrelevant. But she didn't let that deter her. She believed that faith wasn't just a personal choice. It was a shield, a protection against the evil that tried to pull her down. She saw evil in the lies that spread through the media, in the hatred that fueled political division, in the temptation to compromise her principles for the sake of approval. Her faith, she said, was what kept her grounded, what reminded her of the greater purpose she served. Karoline then shared a final thought, one that left the audience in the studio, and the host, completely silent. She spoke about the power of faith to transform not just individuals, but entire nations. She believed that America was at a crossroads, facing a battle between good and evil that played out in every policy, every debate, every election. She saw her role, and Trump's presidency, as part of a divine mission to steer the country toward good, to restore the values that had made it great in the first place. She ended by saying that God had plans for everyone, plans that often unfolded in ways they couldn't predict. For her, that plan had led her to the White House. For Trump, it had led him back to the presidency. And for America, she believed it would lead to a future of strength, unity, and greatness.